Dallas is a city of enormous prosperity, and it's a success story that would not be possible without big banks. But banks aren't supposed to just lend money to wealthy people. The law says banks also have to lend to low-income people. But despite the law, banks make relatively few loans to low-income borrowers. In fact, we found instead of lending money, banks have another way to comply with their obligations. They invest heavily in low-income apartments in areas of slum and blight, and the government rewards them for it. So let's start this journey by talking about the location of this low-income housing. We've identified that banks own or have owned 50 low-income housing developments in Dallas. Those banks include American Express, Bank of America, Chase, Truist, and Wells Fargo. The majority of the apartment buildings are below I-30, where the population is mostly Black and Hispanic, and that includes Sterlingshire Apartments.
It happened tonight in Pleasant Grove.
Sometimes I hear like gunshots.
He was just an innocent bystander.
Bullets don't have no names on them. So they shoot and they can fly anywhere. They come all the way over here.
Some neighbors in Pleasant Grove were discussing living in fear.
That's something to worry about because I got kids of my own, so.
They put these apartments in the wrong place.
Number one, I totally agree. They should have never been there in the beginning. At that corner, we've had issues after issues after issues.
Terrence Perkins is the pastor of Abundance Grace Church near Sterlingshire.
When you take a population of people and put them in one place, you create, and no resources, I think you lead them to a dead end.
Would you be surprised to know that that property is owned by Bank of America?
Really? Wow.
Corporate records show Bank of America owns 99.9% of Sterlingshire, but the bank is what's called a silent partner. It's the developer that actually makes the decision about where an apartment is built and how it is run. But the law says banks can only make these investments if they serve the public good by putting these apartments in places where families can thrive. But we found that's not happening. Look at this. These highlighted slivers and shapes are neighborhoods that Dallas police designate as crime hotspots. We found 25 apartments that banks own or have owned are located inside these crime hotspots. Perkins says banks don't invest in these properties as charity, they do it for profit.
And definitely it is a solid investment. But when you look at it from a moral perspective, I think it's totally wrong. They getting richer and richer off the poor.
Where you live really matters.
Ann Lott is a fair housing advocate at the Inclusive Communities Project. Her nonprofit has sued suburban communities over their refusal to allow affordable housing. Those refusals are one reason that housing is continually built in the same inner-city neighborhoods.
And we have to stop a system that consistently puts poor people in areas where they cannot thrive.
But that is exactly what's happening with bank-owned housing. The law says density of low-income housing shouldn't exceed 20% in any given area. At Sterlingshire, the density is 21%. In this cluster of 3 bank-owned apartments, the concentration of subsidized housing is 43%. And over near Redbird Mall, we found banks own or have owned these 3 apartment buildings, where the density is 63%.
Banks are contributing to the slum and blight of the communities. And one could argue, in effect, that they have become the new slumlord.
At this point, you might be thinking, banks are here to make loans. What are they even doing owning low-income housing? Well, when banks make these kinds of investments, the government gives them high marks on their bank exams, even if they're making relatively few loans. In 1977, Congress passed the Community Reinvestment Act. Under the CRA, the government grades banks on how well they're making low-income loans. In time, regulators revised the rules so banks didn't just get credit for making loans, but also for investing in low-income housing. Today, we found many banks don't lend much money in low-income neighborhoods, but make huge investments in low-income housing which earns them a passing grade on their CRA exams. Remember, there's a large minority population in southern Dallas, and this is a map developed with the advocacy group, the National Community Reinvestment Council. It shows how many home loans are written in Dallas County. The lighter the color, the fewer the loans. And all the red dots are bank-financed low-income housing.
It doesn't make any sense.
Laura Beshara is a civil rights lawyer. She's filed a number of lawsuits over affordable housing policy all the way to the Supreme Court. What does all this say about the CRA?
It's perverted the entire meaning of the Community Reinvestment Act. It's added more new residents to an area of high crime that didn't need to be there. And at the same time, they're not making any loans to the people that live there.
Here's the exam for Bank of America. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, gave the bank an outstanding rating for reinvesting in North Texas's low-income communities, spotlighting $813.9 million of investment in affordable housing. We found Bank of America has invested in 13 low-income apartment buildings in Dallas, including Sterling Shire, the complex just up the street, and another 2 miles to the north. Using public records, we estimate Bank of America has invested $50 million here. But what about loans? Well, analysis by the NCRC shows in 2019, Bank of America made 2 mortgage loans in this same area. In a statement, Bank of America says there is a tremendous need for affordable housing nationwide, and Bank of America is committed to supporting our clients and communities by providing upfront financing that is a critical component for organizations to be able to expand housing opportunities. These apartments that banks own, they're profitable. And that's mostly because the government gives banks major financial incentives to make sure that this housing gets built. The incentive is called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And each year, the United States gives out about $8 billion in credits. Almost all of it goes to banks, with the government eventually paying them back 100% of the money they invested.
This is a really good opportunity for banks to make money. You can get the tax credits, you can sell them for a profit, and bank ownership in tax credits has skyrocketed. It's estimated that there are at least 85% of the owners of tax credit projects.
To be eligible for the government's generous tax credits, the rules say that apartments have to be built in neighborhoods that have a formal revitalization plan. For example, a plan area might have a health clinic, community center, and educational and economic opportunities. But we found that's also not happening. Dallas has designated revitalization plans in these 5 neighborhoods, and banks have financed a total of 6 affordable housing projects inside those zones. But these 44 apartments were all built outside revitalization areas. Regardless, every project on the map was awarded tax credits. In your opinion, are these projects eligible for the tax credit?
I don't think that they should be eligible. I don't think they are.
The Internal Revenue Service is the agency that issues tax credits, and it's been the subject of several critical audits, including in 2015 when examiners found IRS oversight has been minimal. I asked the IRS why it gives tax breaks on apartments that are in places where families have to live in crime and blight. The spokesperson responded, "Since your story involves a specific group of taxpayers in a certain area, the IRS will decline any comment."
The program has operated for over 30 years without any requirements of where the housing should be located. They don't care where these projects go at all. And they don't care who it affects.
In 2015, before Sterling Shire was built, Beshara sent a warning letter to regulators. She said Sterling Shire's paperwork failed to disclose significant criminal activity in the area. She wrote, "This false representation can be the subject of a suit by any future tenants of the project for the consequences, including harm from the high crime in the area."
And we're starting with some breaking news right now in Dallas. A teenage boy was caught in the middle of a shootout and killed.
The innocent bystander on his way back home got shot because of exchange of gunfire.
13-year-old Malik Tyler lived at Sterling Shire, and he died a few feet away in the parking lot of this convenience store that had a long history of violent crime.
Too many people out here getting hurt for no reason. He was an innocent child.
When is it gonna stop? When are people gonna stop?
You do not know what you took from this family.
It's appalling to locate a tax credit project there in an area of high crime that they knew was high crime. It's truly horrific.
On paper, the law says banks are required to make loans to low-income communities. But in reality, the government is giving them a pass on that. Instead, it rewards banks for investing in low-income housing in areas of slum and blight. It's a problem that's 30 years old, and it continues. Last summer, developers tried to put in more low-income housing right across the street from Sterlingshire. Perkins and his neighbors fought back and won.
They'll come back to a community that's not going to fight it and put the apartment complex there or the housing community there and then say, hey, look, we've done something great. But in reality, you're only crippling us.